All right, I show an image.
We just got to change the thumbnail, but that's okay.
Yeah. But I do see us live.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't change the thumbnail. Sorry. Too many things all at once, right?
No, I know.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Well, whenever you are ready.
Okay. 26 letters in the alphabet, and according to mid-90s Sega, 32 of them are the letter X. Welcome to the next level indeed. Today on... Hello, wonderful listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Press B to Cancel. I am your host today, Werewolf, and I am joined by these two lovely fellow bald gentlemen, Sick Jake and Sinistar. How you guys doing tonight?
Good.
Doing
great to be here.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
I'm excited to trash talk.
It's a fine system. There's nothing wrong with the Sega hardware. They've made nothing but great hardware.
It wasn't a system. Okay, that's fine. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Oh, yes. Yeah. To clarify, in case you didn't understand from the intro and haven't picked up from the title or anything like that, we're talking about the Sega 32X today. That weird attachment that even Sega of America struggled to advertise, with ads like a little boy showing a picture next to a picture of the Genesis and 32X being pressed together, and he's going, "Mommy, what are those two machines doing?"
I caught that, and I looked up a history, and I caught that like all of the advertising was, well, in my opinion, was awesome.
Sega of America's 1990s marketing was spot on, and even that couldn't save the 32X.
I mean, and let's get it out of the way early. Chip Hawkins referred to it as a Band-Aid. So, there's that.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I perhaps we should jump in by talking about a little bit of the history of Sega at the time. So Sega had finally started to grab down some of that market share from Nintendo, right? With the Sega Genesis,
Yeah.
Sega does what Nintendo don't. Welcome to the next level. Sega! All that good stuff.
It's fast. It's speedy. This is like
blast processing, attitude, extreme.
They came up with a completely viable, mascot in Sonic, and then completely mistreated him. But that's later on, years. Right?
Yeah,
that's
true.
But Sonic 1, it was a game changer. Literally.
Yeah, and that was not Sega's first attempt at a mascot. He was just by far and away the most successful. Because before that, we had Opa Opa with Fantasy Zone. We had Alex Kidd. And, while they're interesting, they don't have the attitude that Sonic has, I guess.
Right.
It's funny that that this is being compared to Nintendo's mustache pudgy guy in overalls, plumber, as the mascot. Like this is the bar that Nintendo set, and Sega wasn't able to beat that bar with Opa Opa and the monkey who plays Jenkin Match, and we end up with Sonic.
It's a me, Sonic. Oh wait,
yeah, it's wild.
So around early 94, Sega of America got word that Sega of Japan was working on an update to the Genesis. Originally, the 32X was going to be an update to the Genesis. It was going to be like a midlife console refresh. We're so used to the PS4 Pro and the, all these now where there's that midlife refresh where it's more powerful. That's what the 32X was originally going to be.
Well, and this was the second kind of midlife refresh because they came out with the CD first, right?
No, that not like that. Like it was actually going to be a new console that was based around the Genesis hardware with new additional, more powerful hardware within the system.
Gotcha.
Like they released the Genesis 2, but that was just the same for the most part hardware as Genesis 1. This would have been like an actual upgrade in hardware, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there were people at the company who were like, no, we can't do that. People already, like, the idea is to make it to where people don't have to shed their old console
Right.
for a new console. We're trying to, put that mid tier in so that people who want to get in on the new 32-bit consoles can do that while still maintaining their Genesis library.
Can we come back? Can we get back to that world where you don't have to shed your console every few years? Can we get back to that?
Well, we're kind of there right now, right? I mean, like, backwards compatibility is on everybody's minds with new hardware, like the Xbox and PlayStation.
But
Is it full backwards compatible? But no,
it's so
but
hit and miss, right? It's so hit and miss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Sega had already had success with, some success with the Sega CD at this point, where it was a console attachment. It wasn't, didn't blow people out of the water, but it made games a lot bigger and a lot more capable than the Genesis could on its own. And it also added the CD quality audio, which was way better than the techno farts most of the time.
Superior Genesis sound. Thank you very much.
Farty bass.
And then, even when they came out with the Genesis, it wasn't too long till they released the power base converter that let you play backwards compatible from your Master System library.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Yes.
So the Genesis, they really worked to make the Genesis as friendly as possible for people to upgrade to or come into and have an even more expanded library than they would have had before. So, Sega did a lot of stuff that was very ahead of its time with the Genesis. Not all of it worked. I mean, we saw Sega Channel and other things.
I think the 32X had a chance to succeed, and this is later discussion, but if Sega Japan had not been doing what they were doing, and that's just a little bit of a spoiler, we'll get to it, but I think that the Genesis, the 32X, the CD, et cetera, I think that they would have had a chance.
I gotta ask, the Sega CD, how well did that sell for them? And that what year did that come out? Was that 92?
Yeah, quite possibly.
Let me check.
Yeah, I think so. It was late 91 or 92 because Sonic CD came out before Sonic 2, I think. Or maybe very near 2.
Very close, yeah.
We had a Super Mario 3 and Super Mario World issue here.
Well, and we've talked about that in another episode, but Sonic 2 and Sonic CD were sort of developed at the same time by different teams for kind of different purposes with the franchise. It's kind of weird. So,
okay, so the Sega CD sold 2.24 million units, which, I mean, when you compare it to the 32X's sales, is more than double what the 32X sold.
It's almost four times as much.
I remember as a kid seeing the catalog near Christmas, and I remember seeing the Sega CD thinking, I want that. I want the Sega CD. I don't know why. The games I don't really care for, but I really wanted it. But when it came to the Sega 32X, when that was coming around, even I knew that the Saturn was coming out soon, and I was kind of like, maybe I'll wait. Maybe I'll save my money. And I remember explicitly looking at the Sega 32X and saying, you know what, I'll pass. So it's kind of interesting.
I did the same. I was very excited about the Saturn coming out. I was not excited about the 32X. I mean, there are some games, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, that are actually decent games, but in a library of what, 40?
If you include
generous,
if you include other regions, if you're talking the US, I think it was like 31 or 32 in totality.
Yeah. So I think across all regions there were like 40 official releases.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were trash.
So we should talk about competing internal competition, right? Because I mean that's really what killed it, right?
So the 32X, like I said, it was in development and it was originally going to be a fresh console kind of thing that still played backwards compatible with the Genesis. And, they got some pushback internally that said, no, it needs to be an adapter so that people can still play it and not have to shed their old Genesis. So that's what they did. And they ended up using a couple of chips that were a couple of processors that were used in the Saturn within the 32X.
Yeah, in the history,
which was a weird decision, and I'll come back to that.
In the history that I watched on this, like that decision was to try to bring developers forward because they would get experience developing on those chips, prior to the Saturn release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the 32X, it was a complicated piece of hardware in its own right, because you had it factoring the Genesis hardware and then this new hardware in the 32X, and then some companies even dared to also include the Sega CD. Now you got 3 sets of processors trying to run one game.
Yeah.
And there's some stories out there. This thing was hell to install in your Genesis. And I'm sure a lot of people just think it's literally plug it in and you're good to go. No, you had to put in heat shielding and interference shielding with these 2 metal plates on the back of the cartridge slot and the front of the cartridge slot. So that way it could go in.
Jamming open the slot, right? Which is now competing with the shielding. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a Game Genie where you can pull it in and out at will. Like once you had this connected, you weren't pulling it out, right?
Well, funny enough.
Well, I mean, you could run the Genesis game straight through it, so that was the idea anyway.
Funny enough, I actually saw a take that showed that the heat shielding and then if you had the Genesis, the refactored Genesis, it had the spacer as well. You could run without either of them, and it actually worked fine, apparently. So
not necessarily. There are certain games where, not necessarily playing a 32X game, but playing Sega CD or Genesis games, you would get like a weird artifacting over the gameplay or cutscenes in Sega CD FMV games. Okay. That were very distracting, and you just get visual glitches and stuff like that because the 32X was sending out interference. There's also a case of, I want to say it was the Model 2 Genesis and Sega CD all being attached at the same time as 32X. There was a story I heard once. I can't find any stories online to confirm this or corroborate it, but I heard it, I was at an import game store when I was in my early teens. And there was a couple of guys talking about the 32X. And one of them said that they actually had to hack together an attachment to let the 32X run outside of the Genesis because they melted their first Genesis. Like it fried chips inside the system with all the heat generation, which is a problem. So like some people just run into so much heat that they have to shut it off. Otherwise it starts giving graphical
How long are they
glitches.
playing this thing for? The games aren't that good.
It happens within 30 to 60 minutes.
Really? Well, what's funny is fast forward to today, and people are now doing that with their GPUs, right? Because they want to have their GPUs vertically mounted instead of horizontally mounted. And so they're running PCIe extensions, right? I mean, so it was a prediction of the future. If your story's true, it was a prediction of the future. So
yeah, I mean, it's what these guys were talking about at an import store. I mean, it's a bunch of tech geeks, so I would imagine it was there's a likelihood to the trueness of this story. They were not people I knew. I was a few cities away from where I lived at the time, so.
Well, and so to add on insult to injury, so A, you have to install this heat shielding. B, if you have the generation 2, you have to put in the spacer, et cetera, et cetera. But to add insult to injury, because I know it was an add-on, but it really was its own console because it had its own processors and VDCs and et cetera, right? So you actually ran the output from the Genesis, the video output or the AV output from the Genesis into the 32X as with a space or a patch cable on the back, and then you ran it out to your television, and then you also had separate power adapters for your Genesis and the 32X, and they were both
the Sega CD if you had
and the Sega CD
on that too.
The whole power bar.
Sega sold a power bar that had appropriate spacing. They did. And because these were not small transformers, this was prior to the smaller MOSFETs, et cetera, that we have today. These were the big, chonky, hello. And then also, those transformers generated a fair amount of heat each, right? AC to DC conversion with that technology was not a low temperature operation, right? So, I mean, to add insult to injury, in fact, I saw a take that was like, this definitely probably contributed to the death of this thing is, reviewers started just blasting this thing for the fact that it had a patch cable to then an AV cable and then separate power, et cetera, right? I mean, it was...
Yeah, it is so convoluted in how just to set it up. Like, it was 3 pages of instructions to set it up.
Yeah.
Which I would never read. I would never look at the instruction book.
I mean, there's never been that much instructions for setting up any sort of new console you buy.
Yeah, what kid on Christmas morning is gonna sit there for 40 minutes working through instructions?
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Parent
but
assembly required.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but every kid's gonna be like, "Where's my fucking game and where is it now?"
But you know what though? Like when I was a kid though, I do remember seeing. I mean, I know I didn't want one, but I remember seeing magazines were praising this thing before it came out. Like I remember, I used to have a GamePro subscription, and GamePro was like hyping this thing up. And they're like, okay, it's not as powerful as a Saturn, but it's also half the price. It's going to have a 32-bit games. It's going to have a library of games you can play. They were pretty on board with it before it came out. I almost, like in hindsight, I feel like they were paid off, or they received promo.
I don't think so. I think what it was is, it was exciting that there was this mid-tier 32-bit console, for want of a better term, platform, I guess. That was going to be available for a lesser price tag than the PlayStation or Saturn.
Yeah.
And there still wasn't a release date for the Saturn at the time. So people were like, oh, this will be nice to hold us over for a while with more powerful games. And the games they played, I'm sure they thought, okay, these are decent. There's potential here. These can be a lot better than they are. They're better than what I expected already. So let's do it.
Well,
so they were excited for that.
They also sold, there was that advertising where it was like, look at the studios that are on board. And it was a list of studios, right? Yeah. And then when the thing, and so, when you're talking pre-reviews and, the magazines, et cetera, the reviewers think that this thing's going to launch with, say, 10 titles, right? I mean, it looks like a big deal. The thing dropped with 3 titles.
Yeah.
I mean,
they had Konami on board, they had Capcom on board, and then once it came out, I think they looked at what the sales figures, and then they realized that they could spend their resources better on the Saturn coming out rather than waste their time on the 32X.
Though they did apparently run out of their initial 600,000 run relatively quickly.
Sold,
They made 800,000 in their initial run.
Okay.
And over that first holiday season, they did sell 665,000 of them.
Yeah.
And then they struggled to sell the rest of that 800,000.
Okay.
To the point where, the initial price was $160. It got a price drop to $120.
Mm-hmm.
And then later toward the end of trying to get rid of them, it saw a price drop all the way down to $20.
I saw that. I saw that the liquidation price was $19.99, right? US dollars, right?
So in that decade, games were like, well, they were like 65, $70, I think, back then. They're more expensive then than they were now, right? And forget inflation. The sticker price in the 90s was $70 for some of these games. So for it to be only $120, that's not even 2 carts. That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the price, if you take, well, now another misstep that they had is they said in their initial marketing that it was going to be under $150. They said that. And then it dropped at $159.99. So slight change in price. Okay. But that, I mean, the problem is when you get your reviewers to enjoy the product and sell the product, and then it comes out and there's a little bit of some bait and switch. You know, three titles at launch, price is actually more than they stated, etc. I think your reviewers are probably going to turn on you relatively quickly.
Mm-hmm. And they did. They totally did. Once the game started coming out, I remember GamePro having some pretty negative feedback on some of the games. It was just the early hype was weirdly positive, and then afterwards it came out, they dumped on it. This came out in what year? Because the Saturn was 94 in Japan, but the Saturn was later here, right?
Yeah, it was later here. It was summer 95 in the West.
Okay.
But the 32X was November 94 in the West. And once people found out that the Saturn was selling in Japan already at the same time the 32X released here, that was part of the reason it didn't sell so well. People thought there was a longer window between when the Saturn was going to come out. So they were like, well, if it's already selling, it'll be here soon. So why bother getting the 32X? So you had 2 camps at that point as far as Sega fans. Either, you know, I got my 32X and now I feel hosed, or I'm not getting a 32X. I'm waiting for the Saturn. And so
I mean, that's why Nintendo these days is so careful not to announce the Switch 2, I think, because they keep bringing out like promotional themes of the Switch. Like they have the Mario themed one for Mario Wonder coming out this Christmas, and I think it has Mario Kart bundled in. But they want that to sell, but no one's going to buy it if they know the Switch 2 is coming out in spring next year, for example.
Well, and
you got to be careful with this kind of stuff.
You don't want to lose your. I mean, you don't want to, lose your group, your followers by basically releasing a mid-tier that, and so I mean this was I think the misstep that also killed the Saturn in some degree as well, is when the Saturn finally came to the US, they'd already lost a lot of that goodwill. The 32X was a piece of shit, fuck you, Sega. I'm going to go buy a Super Nintendo at 16 bits that has this amazing library, right? I mean, yeah. So,
and that's worth talking about too, is the fact that the Saturn got announced like all of a sudden at E3. Sega was like, oh yeah, Saturn's on sale now. And people were like, what? Like, we thought we had time. I'm saving up. We thought it was going to be a holiday release, and you're just dumping it now? Like, it was such a mess. Sega Japan really thought they knew better than the market at the time, for whatever reason, and shot themselves in the foot like 7 times in a row. It was
well,
this little piggy went to market. This little piggy.
And I mean, their lack of goodwill continued through the Dreamcast. I mean, they lost so much goodwill, right? I mean,
people got so burned from the 32X that they either stayed away from the Saturn and Dreamcast entirely, or at least skipped the Saturn.
Yep.
Like I skipped the Saturn mostly because I think I couldn't find it. I think was part of the problem. Plus, also the PlayStation was coming, and I just figured I would look at the PlayStation when that came out to market.
Right.
And I mean, if you look at the games that 32X was pitching, because they advertised this as, yes, it was cheaper as a stepping stone possibly to the next generation, but it's 32 bits. But the games they're advertising with it, when you looked at the games that were coming out for the Saturn, I mean, totally different quality of graphics. It made sense to just wait for the Saturn if that's what you're going to do. Like I
Yeah.
mean, the 32X is basically a glorified Genesis, right? They just they wanted to double the colors, add a little bit of 3D capability to it, not a whole lot, but a little bit.
Well, the problem is you had that whole concept of you've got to chase the number of bits, right? I mean, and let's be honest, especially on a CRT television, there's diminishing returns with the more colors you add, right? I mean,
Right.
but and Joe consumer, me as a tech individual, I understood, what 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, quote unquote 30 or 64-bit Jaguar, go fuck off. But I understand those concepts, but Joe consumer doesn't. And I'm looking at a standard home television at 480i with, great. So I can smash every pixel can have its own color. Well, now I've just got a mess on the screen. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So that's actually an important point too, because when people look at the SNES and the Genesis today, and they compare the same games that are released on both platforms, I'm gonna pick on Earthworm Jim. I love Earthworm Jim. So, but the Genesis version, when you put side by side on a modern display against a Super Nintendo, most people say the Super Nintendo looks better, dramatically better. But back in the day on a CRT screen, for the Genesis version, they took huge advantage of dithering and the way the CRT displays work, and the colors blended. So when I was a kid, I didn't notice a difference really between the Genesis and the SNES,
right?
Because of the way the technology worked. It's something that's
Yeah.
you don't see today. So you're right. I mean, you can double the colors with the 32X, but how much difference is, like, you're right, Sinister, how much does that actually make of difference on CRT hardware back in the day? Probably not a bunch.
I could put a different color on every pixel. Yay.
Yeah. Like, I mean, then that leaves us with, what, 3D graphics, potentially, some polygon games?
Sure.
But I mean, when you know that the Saturn is coming out, and the Saturn, one of those features is better, like 3D games coming, it doesn't hold a candle to that. So we should talk about some of these games, though.
We should.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The last thing I want to talk about regarding the history of the 32X is, poor sales did not help its case, but it was also a matter of they actually, since they were using the same chips from the Saturn in the 32X, they ran into a shortage. And so they were like, well, we need them for the Saturn.
Yeah. Sega Japan was like, ours. Sorry.
So was it exactly the same chip? Because I know it was the same chip. It was definitely slower than the Saturn.
Yeah,
though,
there
right?
were two chips
in the 32X.
Yeah, exactly the same chips on two of the chips. Yeah.
Okay. Right, because the Saturn had more stuff under the hood. Yeah,
Sure.
But okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
But yeah, they
That's
basically said those two chips, we need those for the Saturn. Sorry, Sega America.
Yeah.
Your initial run is what you got. Sorry.
But how bad would this have been, though, for Sega if they had ignored Sega of America and said, you know what, forget it, we're right. We're going to release a standalone refresh of the Genesis, and we're going to go with that. That couldn't have done better. That had to have been a worse decision to do that. So I think Sega of America might have saved them a little bit of headache by doing an add-on.
I don't know. Personally, I personally feel like if the 32X hadn't existed, the Saturn may have actually had a better life. That's my take.
Right, but Sega of Japan, their plan was redo a Genesis with better graphics, then do the Saturn. They wanted a separate console between the Genesis and the Saturn. And that's what their plan was, right? Sega America said, no, that's crazy, making an add-on for the existing hardware to get people a year, but I don't know.
So they wanted
either way, it messed with the Saturn's plan for sure.
They wanted a Genesis OLED.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yes, like you guys were saying, it's a refresh of the hardware, right? So I mean,
yeah,
it's a bizarre train wreck of a decision. It really is. I mean, I remember as a kid. I mean, you see the Super Nintendo, and then you see the rumors about a CD add-on for the SNES, which eventually became the PlayStation separately. But how smart was it of Nintendo to just, bide their time, keep the SNES the way it was, work on a proper, new console down the road, and kind of go with that. It just seems like such a train wreck for Sega of Japan.
That's really been Nintendo's story is, kind of to a degree, fuck the generation list. We're just going to release when we're ready. right? I mean, that's kind of been their policy for the most part. I mean, they had significant concerns with the Super Nintendo because, you know, getting families to replace the Nintendo in their house was a big if, right? And so I honestly think that they sit on their decisions for a while, right?
Yeah. There's no understanding Nintendo's thinking. Like they're playing that 4D chess with some of their hardware decisions, and that's just the way they've always been like that. And you're right, they're even like that today with some of their decisions. Like they're the company that will work on a game and shelve it for a year before they release it, just when they need a release to come out. No other company does that.
Right.
Right. It's wild.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, should we talk games?
Yeah. Well, one more thing.
Yes.
It's worth mentioning that Donkey Kong Country came out at like the exact same month as the 32X, which probably also didn't help. As much as I'm not a fan of Donkey Kong Country, it was the new shit at the time, right?
Yeah, you have to realize, like, it's a product of its time, right? Like, we look at it today, and the frame rate is ass, and the controls are sluggish, and, you know, et cetera, because of the whole pre-rendered thing. But
yeah, the you know, the visuals in that game were something brand new for people. They were like, oh, what the hell? On a 16-bit system. So
I have 32.
That probably didn't help either.
I have 3D sprites. How is this possible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not real 3D, but it's to the average consumer, it still looked fantastic. Yeah, I know.
Well, they took a nice rendering engine and made some, you know, ray traced, you know, sprites. Sure, they're 2D sprites, but they look nice in 3D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Anyway, let's jump into some of the games for the 32X. And
there's so many to choose from.
Well,
almost 40.
Too many.
Give me one to start with. I've got Afterburner up on the screen right now.
You know, I think start with that one because the one I want to start on a positive note. I don't want to bash the system. I really don't. I'm not a negative guy. I promise. But I'm gonna say there's two games on the 32X that I think nail a certain type of consumer, and that's the person who likes the arcade experience at home. Sega arcade games are pretty well known. They did really well, and the two they had that did well for them was Afterburner and Space Harrier. And the 32X ports of those two games are pretty great. They look really good and they play really good. Are they worth paying $70 for a cartridge? I don't know, but they look pretty accurate to the arcade, I think.
Yeah.
And that's actually some of the praise you can find all over the internet regarding the 32X is that Space Harrier specifically is like the most arcade accurate home console port ever seen at the time.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's a bad game.
I've not
but it
played I've not played Afterburner at all, but both of these are what they call the what were they? Super, God, there's a term for it.
The pseudo 3D.
Yeah, there's actually a term, super scaling.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay.
So both of them do the super scaling, where way off in the distance, it's really tiny and like just 3 pixels, and then as it gets closer, it's really big and very detailed. So it's definitely not motion or mode 7 like the SNES had, but it's still weird and interesting to look at, particularly at the time.
So this is the video footage I'm showing is me doing test plays of all of these games. And I'm going to say I love Afterburner in the arcade. I absolutely adore Afterburner in the arcade.
Right.
But there's something to that yoke, right? That single stick yoke, like on an airplane. Playing this on a controller, it has no centering. And so if you are in a turn and you let go of the controller, you just stay in the turn. So getting back to center is actually an exercise in futility.
Yeah, the controls are kind of weird in this one. I don't understand. This is a game where in the options, you have the option for auto shoot. Because I guess they've realized the controls were not that great. So they just gave you the option to shoot your Vulcan as much automatically.
I probably should have turned that on, honestly.
Yeah, it's a much different game.
Yeah.
Well, did Afterburner on the Master System let you center very easily either.
I have
don't
no idea.
remember.
I have no idea.
I feel
Yeah,
like
I'll be
the
honest.
home ports of Afterburner were always like, once you're in a tilt, you kind of stay in the tilt unless you try and adjust back.
Like, I'll be honest, I was never a fan of Afterburner. I was more of like a Top Gun fan, although both games are quite difficult. But I did like how in Afterburner you can do a barrel roll, although I don't know how you do it. I just did it accidentally a few times, and it looks cool when it happens. I just don't understand how the controls work.
You have to say it right. Do a barrel roll. Sorry.
Don't sue Nintendo.
Yeah.
We're talking Sega. It's weird. It's an arcade game, and I can see myself plunking quarters into it. But to buy this for the home system, I don't know. As nice as it is, I don't think it's a great game to buy for the home use.
Right. All right. So I'm gonna, since my video moved on, Spider-Man.
Ah, yes. Spider-Man Web of Flame? Is that what it was called?
Something like that. So I do like that during the initial load screen or the Sega screen, you actually can, if you're watching the video, you can do all the Spider-Man moves during the Sega screen.
Oh, neat.
That honestly was my favorite part.
Honestly, that's the best part of the 32X is the Sega loading screens. On every cartridge I tried out on the Mister, the best parts were the effects that did in the Sega logo. That's kind of sad, but that was the best part.
So this one...
This was the
Go ahead.
last official release on the 32X.
Okay.
It looks like a prototype. Why does it feel like a prototype?
Well, I in the history I saw, pretty much every game was rushed to market. Essentially,
Right.
pretty much every game. Even Doom, that was a launch title of one of the 3 launch titles, was missing stages. The controls was subpar. You could tell that they hadn't optimized it. Like the thing runs like, the potato PC mode where you like bring in the border. I mean,
Yeah.
But I saw a lot of that with 32X games. Almost every 32X game that tries to be graphically capable has a shrunken down where they're hiding a chunk of the screen with UI. Or, just unnecessary, like Star Trek. Star Trek's, you're playing all on the little view screen in the bridge. You could see more bridge than gameplay.
So one of the things I absolutely struggled with so I think honestly one of my biggest complaints, and maybe this is an issue with the fact that I never played the Genesis, correct me if I'm wrong, but the controls are, so with Spider-Man, you have jump, you have web, and you have attack. And I kept throwing the web or shooting the web and, putting the people into like their little web, held mode. And I would forget to punch them and finish them off. It also has a worse version of Ninja Gaiden's accidental wall grab.
Yeah, it does. The wall grabbing does not feel great at all.
No.
None of the controls in this game feel great, like at all. The jumping feels so bizarre and weird to me, just really unnatural. Like I'd rather play the Atari Spider-Man than this one. I really would. Like it does feel like a prototype. I'm amazed that this was the last official release. It feels like the extra month they could have done something else better.
Right.
Like when you compare it to like Maximum Carnage on the Genesis, there's no contest which is the better game, right? It's just crazy.
Okay. So Spider-Man,
Wild.
and then just the stage progression is weird. Like what is falling on Spider-Man from the top of this building? Like just yeah. Anyway, it felt really clunky for lack of a better term. So
Yeah, it looks pretty clunky visually. It doesn't look super appealing. Like the little effects in the sky look like the most attractive thing on the screen. And I don't know what the hell that has to do with a Spider-Man game.
So the story is whichever villain you're going against puts a web, like an electrical web or a laser web or something over the whole city. And that's what that is. So
okay.
Oh, like Highlander 2.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the the protective mesh over the world. Highlander 2 should never exist. Don't watch it, I'm telling you, please.
Wow, that's a whole other episode.
Yes. So, okay. Yeah, this game was really. And then so coming up here, I get to, I think this is Daredevil. And I'm trying to figure out how to free Daredevil. And like finally I realize punch the base of his cage. Like there's no actual, like, we talk about whatever the term is for like logical game progression, right? That teaches you how to do stuff. This literally teaches you nothing. You're just like, what do I do here? I don't know. So.
And then his steel cage explodes.
Well, as you do, But I think you can use him as a summon, I think, in this game, but I could never figure out how to do any of that stuff.
I think it's based
like,
on
I love the Genesis controller, but it just feels like this doesn't do anything right.
Yeah.
Like nothing right.
So Web of Garbage, Spider-Man Web of Garbage. Yeah. All right.
Web of dumpster fire.
Exactly. All right. What do you guys want to talk about next?
Actually, I'm just following along your video. I want to talk about BC Racers.
All right.
We talked offline a little bit about this one before, because BC Racers was done by Core, who, if you don't know, are the ones who created Tomb Raider. So same group, same company. And this game is basically I guess it's a Mario Kart clone. It's a kart racing game.
Yeah.
Although you think when you go back to Mario Kart and the SNES, you think in the couple years since then they could do something maybe not original, but performs better. But this game, slow, like the frame rate is ass. It's so slow. Like the sound effects don't feel like they're in sync. The controls are awful. It's laughably bad. But now I know it's not just an exclusive to the 32X. BC Racers released on a few different platforms, and I had not tried it on other platforms to see if it's better. But I thought I expected more performance-wise than the 32X version of this game for sure.
Well, and it's one of those games where it's that 3D with sprites on top of 3D. And so as the sprite gets further away, it just becomes a pixelated mess, And so,
but like some of the design decisions, like there's car combat in it, which sounds neat on paper. Your partner can punch for you, but I can only figure out how to punch to the right.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a left punch or not.
I found the same issue.
So it's bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah.
This looks like a weird cross between Flintstones and Chuck Rock as a Mario Kart mode.
Yes. That's exactly the theming, yeah.
Well, and the map is at least this initial map is so bad too, because one of the things that Mario Kart at least does is give you some straightaways. This is literally, here, have a second and a half of straightaway. You're in a turn. Second and a half of you're in a turn. You're and it's
only gonna turn right on this course.
It's the worst version of NASCAR, which series of left-hand turns, right?
Well, like you get boosts in this, but like you're damned if you try and use a boost on a corner, and you only have, like I said, such short straightaways. You don't have time to use your boost. Yeah, the frame rate is what really killed this one for me.
Oh yeah,
bizarrely awful frame rate. I think this is on the Atari Jaguar. I wonder how this compares in the Jaguar. Actually, no, I think about it. I should check it out there.
No, it was on 3DO.
3DO.
Well, and the problem is
probably not great.
Well, and the problem with 3DO is you had Road Rage, which was a fantastic game on 3DO. Yeah. So you go from Road Rage to this, right? All right.
Yeah, it's such a bizarre game. Yeah.
Let's check out the next game on the list.
Brutal Unleashed Above the Claw.
So, okay, so this game...
Is this part of the Brutal Paws of Fury line of games? Or is it something else?
More than one? Is this a franchise?
I'm wondering. Well, because there was a game called Brutal Paws of Fury.
That's this one. This is,
No, this is Above the Claw.
This is Above the Claw.
Okay, hold on. There's more than one? Okay,
So
hold on.
I
gotta look
want
that up.
I want to point
Yeah,
out
looks like it is.
I let a couple of the characters' select screens roll through their mottos, and we have to talk about these because the mottos, some of them you're like, wow. Like,
I have only one judge, the world.
yeah, this
that's
is,
so
but this
bad.
is like during the era where they're like, well, let's make something, risque, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one, okay, to know fear is courage. Cool. Great. Sounds good. Prince of Kenya, his quote is, I have only one judge, the world. What does that even mean?
So yes, this was indeed an update to Brutal Paws of Fury.
Okay. So it's like okay. So like a 63 and a third blockbuster edition or something.
Yeah,
I
or
remember
like,
ads for this
Street
game.
Fighter Championship Edition,
Right. I remember a lot of ads for this game. I remember wanting to try it and never getting a chance to. I thought I would like this game, but when I tried to play it this week for research, first off, just getting into the game is a challenge. You have to enter a name for some reason. Then it prompts you for a password because you can save progress as you unlock moves.
Oops.
But even if you just want to do a straight head-to-head fight with a buddy, it still gives you the name entry and a password screen. There's no like just generic heads versus head like fighting mode. It has this progress system baked in. It's a weird one.
So
yeah, that's odd.
I want to get to whichever one it is, because one of these, the quote is like, let's see, it was like, to teach someone is to not Foxy Roxy, sorry, but like to teach them is to become responsible for them. I'm like, wait, isn't that exactly the opposite of what teaching is for?
Supposed to teach us so they're independent. Yeah. No, life lessons from Brutal. It's unique characters. I give them that. They definitely have a lore behind it. I love the ads. I remember wanting this game so much, but to actually sit down and play this game, and again, this is not the Genesis. This is on the next step up system, and the controls are really awful. Like it does not control well at all.
This is the quote I wanted to call out. Inner strength is a goal above morality. Why be moral if you have inner strength?
Yeah, just strong arm your way through life. Thanks, game.
Yeah, so let's get into some gameplay here. Oh yeah, this was my other thing is like they give you passcodes. I want you to look at that passcode.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's like straight out of Metroid.
Oh my God.
Right? Yeah. So just to play the game, you have to sit and enter a password, right? I mean, there's no battery backup. You can't save your progress to a cart. I mean, are you really going to play Brutal at home and build up your character and go to your buddy's place and put a password to play?
Right.
No.
Hang on, let me spend 10 minutes entering my code, then we'll play.
Yeah.
Oh, you missed one character. It was off by one character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the hitboxes in this game are awful and confusing.
Oh yeah.
And it's just and from what I could tell, a lot of the action gets blocked by giant foreground structures and things. Like I did see one where you're literally fighting and you can only see inside the building they're in, like through the door of the dojo or whatever.
No.
And everything else is behind walls. Like
It's a weird design choice. It's also got some of the cheapest AI in a fighting game I've ever seen. Like I pick on Mortal Kombat 2 for having really very cheap AI. This puts it to shame. Like this game is ridiculous. I'm looking at the footage of Sinister playing right now for the audio listeners. And it looks like you got stuck on the same guy I did with like he looks like he's a wizard. And he's shooting fireball things at you, kicking your butt. And like no matter what you do, you get knocked down.
Well, it's like
so cheap.
It looks like you have to like win to unlock skills, which is horrible.
Yeah.
Like imagine Street Fighter where they're like, I'm sorry, you can't have Hadouken until you win a certain number of matches, right? So
That would be a terrible design choice. So yeah, that's not a great move there.
Oh, this next one is a joy to talk about. Y'all ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cosmic Carnage.
See, I want to like this game. I really want to like this game. You know why I like this game? When you pick your character, it's another fighting game, another award-winning fighting game from 32X. You pick your character, it's all aliens, which are cool, but you get to pick armor pieces if you want or not. And depending on what combo of armor pieces you pick, you get a different colored character. The palette changes, and it also affects your moves to a degree. Like, it's interesting on paper. It's a neat idea.
I want to talk about the story though. So the story is that there's a barge of a prison barge that apparently the controls are damaged and life support systems are damaged, and they float her through space for a while, and then they realize the only option, their only option was to hijack another ship. So they activate their distress beacon. So here comes Joe Good Guy, right? The Renegades engage their engine and smash into the starboard of the unsuspecting military cruiser, and then boarded it. When the Renegades did not anticipate was the tremendous impact that would destroy all but one of the escape pods. So you fight over who gets the escape pod. That's the backstory.
Just all good guys in this game. They're all good guys. Just, fighting over an escape pod. I don't know. I played as the Mantis dude. I thought he was cool looking. I loved how I could pick the armor. But yeah, it's a bad game.
I actually
it's bad.
I actually started knocking off the armor off of the Mantis dude. So let's see. So I picked this dude with like a skeleton head, because skeleton head, right? By the way, for those listening to the podcast,
one of those guys looks like a predator xenomorph combination.
Yeah.
So once again, animated pretty cool, right?
Well, they're animated, but the frame rate is horrible.
Yes.
And so because the frame rate is bad, the controls are sluggish. And then of course the other problem is the computer starts out using all of its powers and abilities, and I have no clue what I can do. I finally figure out that I can do a version of a super uppercut with this character. So let's see if we can go forward here. Yeah, let's see.
Why do the characters in this look like a 90s reimagining of Space Ghost characters?
Yeah, not wrong. Yeah.
They're no longer coast to coast. They're galaxy to galaxy. They're on their prison barge.
It does a graphics trick. So one of the features of the 32X's hardware was it does sprite scaling pretty well. And this game definitely uses sprite scaling, but not in a way you would expect. When you do like a sweeping kick or certain punches or victory animations, they scale the sprite to zoom in on the screen a little bit to kind of make it as part of the moveset. It's a neat trick. I don't know if it looks great, but it's neat that they tried something different. Yeah.
So here in a second. Oh yeah. So here I start knocking off his armor. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. You talked about being able to pick that Mantis character's armor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I knock off the armor. So I'm thinking I'm doing well. No, apparently knocking the armor off just makes him madder.
Well, in a lot of fighting games, once you knock off the armor, the character wearing the armor gets faster.
That's true.
And sometimes stronger because of it.
So now this was my favorite part coming up about this game. You'll see it in a second.
Well, for the audio listeners, explain what it is.
Okay. So I was not expecting him to do this roundhouse leg kick and explode my head.
Yeah.
And then blood comes spurting out. And then as I fall over, blood splatters all over the floor.
It's great. When I
Yeah.
played, I got cut in half from torso, Darth Maul like, and just blood splatter, torso off my legs.
You got
I thought it was hilarious.
You got the Samurai Chowdown treatment. Samurai Showdown treatment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this is
trying to go
post
for
Mortal
that,
Kombat, right? So this is normal,
yeah, I was
right?
gonna say
This is what you
they were
get.
trying to go for that Mortal Kombat gore factor.
Yeah. Now, I didn't actually keep recording through the continue screen. I wish I had, but the little continue screen has that same animation where my head popped at the end when I didn't continue. So okay, Darxide. I don't know if you tried this one, Jake.
I don't know if I played this one. Let me see.
This is
Frontier. Is that the same Frontier as Elite?
Elite, yeah. But this is a frame rate mess.
Oh no.
Oh yes.
This looks bad.
Oh yes. This is a frame rate mess.
I love how you're going to the Mr. menu, probably looking at the frame rate.
Like,
did I configure this right? Oh, you turn on turbo. Good man. Yeah. How bad is it when you got to turn on turbo when it runs so bad? This is like single digit frame in the opening.
Oh yes. And the game does not oh my god. So when you see it, look at this frame rate. Yeah, I go in and I turn on turbo.
Oh my goodness. Oh gosh.
So this is like a Star Fox type of game, I guess. And that's being generous. It looked like a rip-off of an X-Wing. It's not bad looking. Like the Starfield looks good. The Nebulas look cool. And once you're playing the game, it's a little bit better on the frame rate, but it's still not great.
Yeah.
So this is a 3D shooting game, right? I see them destroying rocks and whatnot. So this is neat. This is showing you some of the 3D capabilities of the 32X, because it was supposed to be a stepping stone. It's not going to be as good as the Saturn, although let's be real, Saturn was not great at 3D either, really. Not like the PlayStation.
Right.
It's neat that this is on the 32X, that this is adjacent to the Genesis. I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. So I finally figure out my initial goal is to play asteroids and destroy the asteroids. And then eventually, as I destroy enough asteroids, then in come enemy ships and stuff like that. But it also became very, samey gameplay very rapidly. It was, which is a problem with another game we'll talk about here shortly. Which is, basically, okay, cool. I've, played this for 5 minutes and I've literally done pretty much everything that this game has to offer, right?
Yeah. Like, I think this is indicative of the 32X, right? Like very shallow games, right? Some of them have some graphical tricks that they've added to it. Like this has, destructible asteroids. Pretty cool, again, for the 32X.
Mm-hmm.
There's 3D polygons here. I mean, as low poly as they are. But there's not a whole lot to the actual game itself, right? You're messing with rocks. Like, are there ships? Oh, there are ships. I see a
Yeah.
I think I see a ship.
Yeah,
So, like, there's some gameplay here. And as soon as the ship comes on the screen, the frame rate tanks. So...
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, is this a prototype? That was my go-to thought in every game I played. Is this a prototype? Is this a beta? Did this actually get put on a store shelf somewhere?
Well,
did somebody pay money for this?
And apparently that was a problem pretty much across the board, as everything was rushed because this thing, basically they're like, oh crap, we've got to figure out how to make this sell. So
yeah.
All right.
But how do you have the company Frontier, who's the makers of Elite, one of like the most important games I think on PC gaming? The Elite's got a fantastic legacy.
Yeah.
And this is what they're selling. Like this arcade shooting game with shitty frame rate, blowing up space rocks.
Exactly.
That's wild.
So I do want to call out though that I did I guess technically cheat on the frame rate. The video you're watching is with the turbo on high. Which the original hardware did not have, right? I mean, so
yeah.
Can
you imagine how quickly that would have melted your Genesis?
There's a fire hazard. What are you doing?
You needed to double up on the heat shields.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing I love about the Misters. It has the option to overclock the CPU emulation that it's doing. Yeah. And that actually was funny that some games you turn that on and it didn't even do anything. Like the
Right.
Doom game we spoke about earlier, you turn on turbo, it does nothing. That game was just ported badly all around. There's nothing that can improve it. And that's just wild.
Well, since you brought it up, let's change over to Doom.
Okay. So, okay, I know you said it was missing levels, and I think the music was considered not great.
But the music
you mentioned the controls being bad. The controls are not, they're okay. I like how it's like you hold a button and then you can strafe with the D-pad. That seemed pretty natural to control for a first-person game.
My problem is that the turning was like it was actually accelerated. Like if I tapped left or right, it was like I had to literally tap and let go. If I wanted to aim at something that was just over a little bit, I had to like feather the crap out of that control, right? So
yeah, that's fair. It's definitely sensitive. But I mean, I compare this to what was the Duke Nukem.
Well,
I can't remember what it called. I mistaken for him something else earlier. But Duke Nukem on the Saturn. The Saturn controller had 6 buttons and 2 shoulders, and a lot more buttons available. This is on the 3-button Genesis, and they pulled it off. I think they did okay there. It's just a shame that it's the size of a postage stamp. that's the only thing. I don't like.
That frame that drops in the gameplay just a little bit, it's kind of disappointing because you're already losing the bottom part of the UI of the screen, right? And then they're like, you know what? Let's just put this random rock texture around the gameplay. Shrink it. Nobody will notice.
Well, that's actually kind of what they did with like making it so that it could run on crappy computers. Was they just shrunk the screen size, and they didn't actually change the resolution. They just chunked in your border.
Yeah. But I don't know if you ever played this on Super Nintendo.
No.
But I would say this is probably, in terms of gameplay, it's probably better and more accurate to the PC game than the Super Nintendo one. Because in this, it looks like the sprites can actually look the other way. Whereas on Super Nintendo, they are always staring you down like deep into your soul, right?
Yeah, I think they actually turn in this one, or at least they have turn sprites. Yeah. I mean, it's Doom on a home console. I mean,
it wasn't great on Super Nintendo either. The only advantage that I would say SNES probably had was that you could turn faster with the shoulder buttons.
Right. Yeah.
See, it needed that because, as I said, turning left and right in this was like you see me swing past the enemy and swing past the enemy and swing past the enemy. You know, it almost needed to have slower controls and then shoulder button, you know?
Like it
was either that or shoulder button strafed. I don't remember exactly, but it was something like that.
That brings up another question I have about 32X. Is the 32X was post 6-button controller for the Genesis?
It was.
But most of the games I tried out didn't have support for the 6-button controller. They didn't use it. And there's lots of games that could have. Like there's a few mech games on the library that, man, I wish they had 6 buttons, and they don't. They just use the 3. It's kind of disappointing.
Yep. All right. So I had it on the list because I was just going through the list in order, but there's a golf game that has an absolutely horrible name. Golf Magazine 36 Great Holes. Starring Fred Couples.
So is that like an official magazine? Is this like a product placement type of deal? It might be.
Maybe.
I like that they called it 36 Great Holes.
Right.
In my relationship, I only need 1 great hole. Thank you very much.
Challenge accepted.
But there was also like, if you shot, like after your shot, he'd say something. And it always just sounded so out of left field. The way they do it. It was kind of funny.
Oh, and for me, so one of the things I noticed is the button to, you have, it's like every other golf game where you have your swing power and then it comes back and it's your aim, right? And you try to put it in the, within the line, right? And the reaction time, I learned you had to hit the button early. And every time it just went off the edge, he would always just say, whiffed it. Whiffed it.
I need that soundbite.
Whiffed it.
So I got a lot of whiffed it.
I don't want to knock it because it's a golf game. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of watching golf, but there are games that I like that have been pretty good. Like
Sure.
even NES Golf, I thought was fantastic. I love that. And there's Genesis sports titles that were pretty good. And there was a Tiger Woods golf game on Genesis that was pretty solid. And then we got this.
And honestly, any Mario Golf I have enjoyed, really and truly.
Oh, they're great. Yeah. Hot Shots Golf later on. Yeah. Like I can appreciate a good golf game.
Golf game is still fun for people who are not golf fans.
Yeah.
But...
Yes.
Well, and I, being a PC player, I had Lynx 386 that was absolutely fantastic, right? I mean, hyper accurate for the time, all of that stuff. And I've actually played it on my rebuilt Pentium. I actually love the thing. It's great. So there are good golf games. This one, I mean, it wasn't bad. But you're right. Every time you hit a shot, he says something. And I just got a lot of whiffed it.
Look at that digitized sprite, though. That animation is slick.
Oh, yeah.
It's not bad.
Yeah. Yep.
No, it's not terrible. I mean, if I had bought this, I'd be okay with it, especially if you're a golf fan. But
sure.
Again, I compare it to the Genesis golf games, and there's definitely better ones than the Genesis.
I do want to point out, though, that like there was a failed decision in this moment where the display that gives you the the result from your shot when it's over a sand trap is unreadable.
Oh. Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, so not a bad golf game. I mean, I could.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's probably worse. There's probably much better, but it's probably a middle of the road golf game. It's probably enjoyable if you're really wanting to play some golf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Knuckles Chaotix.
Man, I wish this was good. The logo is good. The starting Sega screen is awesome looking.
Well,
just,
and the straightforward gameplay, like the very first section, I'm like, hey, it's a Sonic game.
Yeah.
I mean, it plays like a Sonic game. And then they introduce this rubber banding piece to it that honestly, first, I had no idea what it was looking for, right? Like I end up at this wall that I can't get through. And there's two little spots that have silhouettes of my characters. And I'm like, oh, it must be a respawn spot for my character or something, right? No, I finally figured out that there's this hold button that then the other character can very slowly rubber band away.
Yeah.
Gotta go fast.
It's
Except you're not supposed to. Ever.
kind of awkward, and they really went for it with like, we don't have enough characters in the Sonic universe, so let's give Knuckles his own game and introduce Vector, Mighty, SBO, Charmy, and some robot too, apparently.
But at least you still get Eggman.
But don't knock it though, because Sonic fans love some of these characters. Like when Mighty was announced for Sonic Mania, there are people who are like, "Oh yeah, shit, yeah, Mighty's in the game now," and you're like, "Who?" And like Mighty from
well, I mean,
Chaotix?
I know them all by name. I know who they are. SBO the Chameleon, Mighty the Armadillo, Vector the Crocodile, Charmy the Bee. I know them because I read the comics.
Okay,
are they in the comics? Are they comic characters? Okay.
So this
they
also
in the comics,
This also used the whole sprite scaling thing to like the weirdest degree. Yeah.
Why is Knuckles
like
a
the
giant?
Zooming in is crazy.
Yeah, and I didn't understand the giant thing. So this is where I'm trying to figure out where the hell to go and what the hell to do. So I'm like, well, I must have missed a section, so I'll go back in the map. Nope. The map is literally all I have there.
Yeah. Like this takes the problem. See, the problems I had with Sonic CD, I didn't really care for Sonic CD because I kept getting lost, which in a Sonic game is kind of not what the brand is. And this game I got even more lost, and I couldn't move very easily because of the rubber banding. Like it's when I say I'm joking, you got to go fast, but then the rubber band effect kicks in when you're trying to go up a hill, and he pulls you right back down. Like I remember we did an episode about sidekicks, and I bitched about Tails for 20 minutes because Tails with his flying will pick Sonic up accidentally and mess with your momentum. It's that times 10 because you're always chained to the damn character. Like the only character, and this is my pro tip for this episode, is pro tip, just take Charmy the Bee. Because Charmy can fly and just dangle the other character wherever you go and make skating through the game at least possible. But its control's so awful. Like it just I wanted this to be good.
Is that what that was conveying? Was Knuckles stand here?
Yes.
SBO stand there?
Yes.
And hold the button so
that
he
was
doesn't
not
run
clear.
But if you're on, but here's the thing is like the hold button, if you're on top of each other, you actually pick up the other character and start walking away. You're like, what? And then like I had to figure out how to get him in the correct position. So, but the problem is I picked him up again. Like just
it's weird.
And then I hit the wrong button and the sprite does the weird growing thing, which I never understood. Like
it's such a shame though, because so we never got a Sonic game, a 2D Sonic game on the Saturn, right?
Right.
So this is the last we had a Sonic for years. And the graphics are great.
Yes.
It's just the gameplay is ass.
I actually, when I started playing it, I'm like, oh, this looks like a cool Sonic game. And then I was like, I'm tired of the hold mechanism.
I'm confused by the fact that you have negative 42 rings.
Magic.
Yeah.
I'm so confused. I don't understand how that works in a Sonic game. 0, anything less than 0 is dead.
Right.
Right? That's how a Sonic game works.
Uh-huh.
This is one of those games where they probably had that in the big development, and they're like, you know what? This is too hard. We can't have them die at 0 rings. We'll just have them go negative. Give them a break.
I mean, there were ideas in this game that were interesting, right? Like the characters had different move sets and abilities that we had not seen anything like in a Sonic game at that point. But it was weird that they were like, you know what? We need a Sonic game that does not even bother with Sonic. And then all the music should be nowhere near as good as a traditional Sonic game.
Right.
Like that's even a bad Sonic game has a ripping soundtrack. And all the music I heard in this game is just dull and forgetful.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't get this game at all. I gotta ask, like I'm looking at the gameplay now. So they're bound by these rings, but not really bound. They're just hanging on to them. Could they not just let go? Can they just not drop the ring for 5 freaking minutes?
How do they have a ring in each hand with negative 42?
My God, the negative is killing me. But like I see Knuckles trying to glide through the air because that's his cool power from Sonic 3. He glides, but he can't go very far because he's tethered to another character that can't fly.
Right.
Like how was this a design decision? I wonder if there's a ROM hack that makes this playable by separating the characters in some way. I'm gonna have to check this out because I want this game to be good. I love the characters they've done here. The sprite work is awesome looking, but it's so bad to play. I couldn't get past. I will say
the stage art looks a little muddy, not as interesting as Sonic stages usually look.
Okay.
The color palette's a little weak and uninspired, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, like I just moved to I moved back in the video and the blocks are actually almost fuzzy, right? So
yeah, and the colors they chose are kind of like it doesn't excite me. There's that foreground, like not foreground, but the immediate background right behind up on the right that you just ran in front of that just looks like a broken wall of Tetris. I don't understand what's happening there. Like there's usually so much creativity in Sonic level design, and here they were just like, you know what? Weird alien planet. There you go. That's all you get.
They get very busy with the colors. There's almost too many colors, maybe. I mean, maybe it's because we're so used to the 16-bit Sonic games where there was more of a limitation on the graphics. I don't know. I like the style. I think the colors are fine to me. I'm looking at this grass stage that you're on later in the video, and it looks good to me. Like if this was good, this could have justified the cost of the damn add-on. Like the system could have been fine if this is the only game that was good on the system, but sadly it's not good.
So next up I have Kolibri, which I couldn't figure, honestly, like my phrase that I was playing was, what the fuck do I do? You're a hummingbird.
Oh, that one.
Well, and here's the thing is I watched some gameplay from somebody else later, and apparently eventually you get the ability to fire something or whatever. I couldn't get shit to work in this game. Like I was like, oh, it's a hummingbird simulator. Cool.
Is it like an Eco the Dolphin type situation, but you're a hummingbird? Is that what they're trying to go
That's
for?
kind of what it looks like visually.
Well, and here's the other thing. In the world of a 32-bit quote unquote console, it's so full of dithering. So full of dithering.
Oh.
Well, but I mean,
Frog ate
again,
the hummingbird.
Yep.
Yeah,
as frogs do.
But I mean, if you're playing this on a CRT, I don't think the dithering would have been quite so apparent.
Okay, that's fair.
But you're right. For a more advanced system, like you think they would have done better with the graphic style. I'm just trying to figure what this game is supposed to be. Like maybe an Eco thing, maybe, I guess, or Echo.
Yeah.
But you can't attack. You're not eating anything. What's the goal of the game?
Well, and I found out that the other hummingbirds are just assholes and like wall you in. Like,
yeah.
Like, can't we just be
Animals are
friends?
pricks.
Can't we just be friends here? Come on.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, what the hell is the point of this game? They're just like, start game, have at it. Good
Yeah.
luck.
Good
Figure
luck.
it out.
Weird.
Well, and it was probably during the era where I needed to read the manual.
Oh, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, 32X had FMV games, so we were kind of at the point where they could at least throw a little bit of something in the game and be like,
There's some audio
"This is
snippet
what
to
you're
tell you what to
doing,
do.
man."
Yeah.
Yep. So that one I just couldn't figure out. Okay, Jake, here's the one we really wanted to talk about.
God, Metalhead. Yes. So this is your polygons right here. This is your 3D. You like Virtual On? Have we got a game for you? It doesn't play like that. This is a game where this is one where once I figured out the controls, it has the hold a button to strafe type of movement, and I thought that was okay. I felt it a little bit slow when plotting when I was playing this game until I realized if you double tap, you start running.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, it opened up a little bit. But it's a game where I don't know what the goal is. You're shooting everything. Like there's trucks that don't even shoot back, but apparently you destroy the truck. I guess they're the bad guy. Like you're shooting everything that moves on this map, but they just keep respawning. So I was going in circles around this city map, destroying everything as a mech, and it was neat. But you only have 2 weapons, and it felt like it was never ending. And I didn't realize if it was a goal. Again, it felt like, am I playing a prototype? Is this a demo for an idea that just they couldn't sell it for the Saturn, so they dumped in the 32X and ran? Is that what this game is?
So
I don't know.
I have to.
I love that.
That was
the intersections.
That's why I backed up the video and replayed it. Is because when I was watching this intro, the thought in my head was Nyam. Here you go. Here you go. Just
This is great.
Okay. But I mean,
It's so cartoony.
you know what's not cartoony though is when you start off a mission, you get this like television screen pops up and you get a very photorealistic face of somebody who talks to you.
Oh, it's so bad.
And it's so bad, but it's oddly realistic and it's weird, especially in this game.
Let me get to where I actually get into the gameplay. Oh, there's another. They repeat the Nyam later in the intro. All right. So, okay, stage 1, mission 1. Oh, and it reads everything to you. It's all stage 1, mission 1.
Yeah.
Okay, here comes the weird face.
And it's like a Max Headroom style head. Like it's just the way.
Oh.
Too few frames of animation when he's speaking to you. And again, you just expect more, especially from a system that you know can do FMV snippets, right? I don't think we're asking for too much.
Nope.
They were just like, just throw a random assortment of a picture of this guy talking in there and just randomly cycle through the images. It'll look like he's talking just fine.
3 frames of different facial animations. Just repeat.
But I mean, it looks okay. Like there's textures on those buildings. That's more than I can say for some PlayStation games.
Yeah.
It looks all right.
What was the game that we blasted the other day where you're the tank driving around?
Battle tanks.
Battle tanks. It feels like battle tanks. It really does.
Yeah.
I got that same vibe from it, actually.
Yeah. So, Jake, I don't know if you figured this out. There's no pause. If you actually press the start button, you actually go outside your mech. And you have like 3 cameras. Yeah.
Oh, shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So let me see.
Try hitting start.
Let me see. Okay, here we go. So I hit start and it like moves the view down. And you can actually see your cannons, and then start and it backs behind.
Okay, that's neat.
Yeah. And then I think it does even an overhead view. I think I hit it one more time.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I played it, it was only from the first person view. And like I said, it felt weird until I realized I could run by double tapping. But it just felt weird because I didn't feel like I was running because you don't see your legs in that view.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there's an overhead view or a third person view makes a lot more sense now. I wish I knew that.
You don't get...
You know what? It controls okay. It looks okay. It just, again, it's a very shallow gameplay experience. I just didn't feel like there was much there.
You didn't get enough meow when you're playing in first person view.
They didn't have that as a sound effect.
All right.
This version of Mortal Kombat 2, it's probably the best rendition of Mortal Kombat 2 on home consoles at the time.
Although I had my controls set to 6 button and it only used 3.
Did you go in the options of the game?
That I think
the Genesis had that where even though you had the mode button turned on the controller, you had to go in the options to flick it on every time you started that game up, and that was frustrating.
Because I look like I play absolute trash in this because I was like, how do I do low punch, high punch, low kick, high kick? Yeah. So,
but honestly, even if you had 6 buttons turned on, the AI in Mortal Kombat 2 is incredibly cheap. And like this is an AI that will low kick you the entire fight and not even bat an eyelash. That's what this game does.
Gotcha.
It's ridiculous.
But I agree.
Color quality on the sprites looks good. Details are not muddied or anything.
Right.
Like
frame rate is acceptable compared to the arcade. Right. I mean, the frame rate in the early Mortal Kombats was never good.
And this one brought back the voices that were missing in the Genesis version.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have the loading time issues that the Saturn has. So
with Shang Tsung, that's right.
Just with everything.
Okay, but it was noticeable with Shang Tsung because when he morphs, it loads.
Yeah.
And this, you wouldn't have that problem.
A lot of character.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean,
not a bad port, I guess.
Yeah, I only played for, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that. But it felt like Mortal Kombat 2. I will give it that. I wish I'd checked for the 6-button configuration in the options.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you like Mortal Kombat 2, I think this is not so bad. You know what? There's more games on here that are better than I thought. Yeah. Or at least they're acceptable ports, I guess.
All right.
If you like Mortal Kombat 2.
Next up is probably the best game on the system.
Which one?
Virtua Racing.
Yes, I like this game. It's one of my favorite games on the Genesis, actually.
Yeah, and the 32X version, I mean, to me, it looks like the arcade version. It really does.
Yeah, like the Genesis version I rented the Genesis version, and I liked it quite a bit. But it had to have a special chip on the cart. It was an expensive cart. But I rented it a few times, and I liked it. But it didn't look quite... It was nowhere near the arcade quality. But this version, is much more closer. But also, it proves in the arcade game because you have 2 extra cars. You have stock cars and you have, they call it prototype cars. I don't know what the name of that is, but it's just, there's 3 different vehicles. And I think there's an extra map, if I'm not wrong. If I remember right, the Genesis version had 3. This one, I think, has 6.
5, I believe.
5? Okay. But this is a great game. I love this game. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. And I know it's riding the Virtua, polygon style of graphics, which were, all the rage at the time. But I think it plays pretty great. And it's not for those arcade games where, most arcade games, you have a timer. And if you don't hit the checkpoints in time, you lose very easily.
Yeah.
This one though, I feel like I was more often than not able to finish race with no issues. Did I win? No,
Right.
but at least I finished the race on a single quarter, and they kind of captured that in the home game too.
Yeah.
This is clearly to me what led to Daytona USA, and I love the Daytona USA games. I think they were a blast, and I think I have tried this a couple of times at the arcade, but it was like one of those big 8 players sit in the F1 car. So it was like $4 to play it. You got to play one track, and then it was like, well, that felt like a ripoff. But
yeah, no, you're not wrong. I remember those setups too when it was brand new. Because like when it was in arcades, that was the big thing, right? 3D graphics were still new in arcades, and this was kind of pushing that aesthetic. So
now I
3D
will say,
graphics and that scale of multiplayer was huge in the arcades. So, but this actually looks decent. The camera's a little like I'm gonna go left, I'm gonna go right, I'm gonna go left, I'm gonna go right.
Right. Yeah. The one thing that I will say is, I miss analog sticks because I had forgotten just how much you had to feather turns when you had a D-pad to do racing games, right? I mean, so I would go into a turn and I'd be like, okay, hold it. Oh no, I'm going too far. Okay, tap it. Oh, now I'm not going far enough. Like, Paradise Lost, right?
Yeah, this is a game where like you have to use brake, but also you have to really pump that gas to get around corners, and it's not quite simulation, not quite arcadey. It's kind of right in the middle, but it is approachable enough that I really like this game, both in arcades and in this version. Yeah. Like this is. I mean, I think I said it in the past episode. Whenever I spin up the core on the Mister, this is one of my go-to games to just to relax and play for 10-15 minutes. It's great for that kind of game, and I think with the added cars and maps or like racetracks, I think this is one where if I had paid $60-70 for it, I would have been happy with this. I think this is good.
So we're coming up on an hour and a half in this episode, so we should probably talk about the next couple pretty quickly.
Okay.
I mean, we can go up longer. I just know that we, yeah. Star Trek Arcade.
Star Wars Arcade.
Or Star Wars Arcade, sorry. There's the Star Trek Bridge Commander.
Made people mad, I'm sure, just now.
Use the Force, Harry. Quote unquote Gandalf.
Send that mail to Sinistar, care of
Damn it, Yoda.
Cancel.com.
Jedi, not a lawyer.
Yes, exactly. So I felt like this game, it plays well. Now, I don't have any audio. I implore you to go watch a playthrough of this on YouTube and listen to the voice actor that they got for Admiral Akbar, because it's awful. Yeah. It's awful.
How hard is it to find somebody who sounds like Akbar from the movies? It can't be that difficult to do it.
This guy sounds like he's from Jersey. He's almost like, go fuck yourself. Like,
it's a trap.
Awful.
It's a trap.
Yeah. Yeah. Gameplay wise though, it's not a bad one. It's a little frame rate's a little bit chuggy, but I still enjoyed playing this one. I don't think I played the original version of this in the arcades because it's based on an arcade game. So I might be missing out, but I like how it has the arcade levels in here, but they've also had a set of modified remix levels that are harder for the home version. So that was interesting to me.
The visuals in this are actually pretty decent, all things considered. I mean, the frame rate is super smooth here from what I'm seeing, but it's just a bunch of rocks floating around over there. So, once the TIE fighters come in, though, like the TIE fighters and fighting over the top of the, because what I watched, they were fighting over the Death Star, shooting down cannons and TIE fighters and all that. And I mean, it seemed really good. It didn't seem like there was any slowdown. Really pretty for the time. Like, this is one of those ones that kind of aged well and really showed up any of the other space shooters on the platform.
Yeah.
At least you're hitting ships in this one and not rocks. Right? Like that Darxide one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, this one's a decent port. I will agree that this one's decent. And at the beginning you actually get a selection if you want to play the non 32X, additional levels, etc., or if you want to play the non-enhanced, I guess, version. I didn't try the non-enhanced. I selected for the 32X version, but no.
I mean, the nice thing about this also is like, yeah, it's got that HUD around the bottom if you want to be in first person, like in the cockpit. But once you leave the HUD, like if you go third person outside the ship, everything on screen is gameplay. Like,
yeah. It's not a poster.
They're not
stamp,
hiding
right?
anything with the cockpit. They're just
Yeah.
giving you immersion in this case, which I love.
Yeah, you still get like your shield view, so you can understand if you're about to get screwed, but that's it, right? So, yep. No, not a bad port. So,
this is definitely one of the more impressive 3D entries on the platform, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So Pitfall, the Mayan adventure. Now, I actually played this. This was released on Windows as well. So I played this on Windows back in the day.
Was it? I played the Genesis version back in the day. I like this game, actually. I don't know if I'd play it on the 32X. I don't think I would have bought it on 32X.
You're gonna see that I am ass at this game in my play style here.
Okay.
I apparently love the quicksand. But it felt like
Is there anything about this that's improved from the Genesis version?
I don't think so, to be honest with you.
Because
I mean, maybe there's more colors, there may be more fluid animation, but the Genesis version of this game is actually really good. I mean,
it's a lower frame rate than the Genesis version.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well,
it is a lower frame rate than other platforms on the 32X, including the Genesis and Super Nintendo.
Interesting. Okay.
Huh.
Which doesn't make any sense.
Play them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
Maybe it's an issue of rushing it and it wasn't optimized enough or something. I don't know, but
maybe. Yeah. I don't think it's a bad game, but I think it's a port for port's sake, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? Like, why buy that when you could have just bought in the Genesis version probably for a lot cheaper and be just as happy?
Yeah.
It's a good game. I beat it. I liked my time with it when I rented it as a kid.
Oh, so Motocross Championship.
Yeah.
Everything I watched of this was a crack up.
Oh, and
now before we show the gameplay, I want to ask, when you guys were kids or younger, or at least for me, when I was a kid, I would play Excite Bike. And you start, and there's all those bikes on the screen at the same time as you, and you go to move into them, and that's how every race in this game starts for everybody.
Oh, I noticed that exact same thing. I noticed that basically I would start the game and it would be just like chug 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 against all of your enemies, just not enemies, your competitors. Just and there's like, and you're like it's like it's just constant. So here we go.
Can you imagine Mario Kart being like that? Can you imagine playing Mario Kart and you can't get off the starting line because Toad's in your freaking way when there's actual physics involved? Like, where the AI just clusters together?
Here goes the start, and it's just like pile on. Nobody's moving. Finally, you get out of the pile.
People fall over left and right.
Yeah.
It's great.
This can't have been this game couldn't have been QA. There's no way this goes to QA. And they're like, you know what? Good game. We're done. Ship it.
Every race starts with everybody just running into each other and just stalling out. Yeah, roll it.
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's so bad. It's like it's a really bad 3D Excite Bike is what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
It was kind of like Excite Bike 64.
Excite Bike 64. I know people actually like that game. I can't stand that game.
Yeah, I can't either.
I like the original, but anyway, yeah, another awful game.
All right, so
this was one of those. It's just like, how do you let that get past? Like, everybody has to experience that at the beginning of every race. How do you not fix that before shipping?
Right.
Like make the AIs go straight.
Real life?
Or like half the AIs just go straight for like the first 5 seconds. Let everybody sort of find their space and then fine. But everyone's just like, no, we all have to be in the middle.
Yep, run for the center.
Stumbling over each other.
All right, another high quality entry, genuinely high quality entry, Virtua Fighter.
Yeah, this is surprisingly good. I thought this would be awful because like I played there's a Genesis version of Virtua Fighter, if you can believe it, and it was they tried to do the 2D rendering of
Street Fighter
sprites
kind of thing,
and it wasn't good at all. But this is totally 3D Virtua Fighter. I mean, as it go to the arcade, no, but it's pretty fluid. When we say frame rate issues, this game was actually pretty fluid for the 32X.
Now, I am trash at Virtua Fighter, so don't expect anything but
same.
trash.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It takes me time to get back into the Virtua Fighter groove. Otherwise, I just suck at it. Like, it's a very different style of fighting game than what you're used to when you play Street Fighter or Tekken or anything like that. It's a lot more slow and strategic in general, and you kind of have to know your move sets. But, there's no winning with button mashing in Virtua Fighter.
No.
Yeah, it's your animation committed when you hit a punch button. Like it's definitely tactical, like you said. But it's a 3-button game, which is perfect for this controller.
Mm-hmm.
For a home port of Virtua Fighter on, the Genesis, kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does not look bad. It actually looks pretty decent. Like it's obviously nowhere near as pretty as the arcade, and I use the term pretty loosely because I mean they're all Lego bricks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Virtua Fighter never looked good. Like even the modern Virtua Fighter doesn't look good to me. Like it's just something about the models and characters feel uncanny valley like. It just never looked like great. But the gameplay was always interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Virtua Fighter 2 I really enjoyed, but I used to sink a lot of quarters into Virtua Fighter 1 at the arcade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really liked this. I loved the fact that it was 3D and the music was good too.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that this is such a decent port, but this was also like released for the 32X, I want to say about a year after it was released for the Saturn. So
okay.
It was kind of late in the console in the 32X's lifespan. And I know it's not a long lifespan, but
right.
Well, this is one of those ones they could have pointed to and said, "Hey, look, when we said this is like is it a Saturn? No, but this is a nice middle ground if you don't want to invest in a Saturn because we have Virtua Fighter. But if it came out after the Saturn version, not so great."
So, and then we already touched on this one at the beginning, but Space Harrier, and it plays well. I actually did not have experience with Space Harrier as a kid. Now I've had experience with it, later as an adult. I never played this in the arcade even. So, but I mean, it plays well. The sprites look good. The animation looks good. It's fast. I mean,
it's Space Harrier. That's what it is, right?
It looks smooth. The sprites scale really well. It's almost mesmerizing to look at how smoothly everything moves. And I think that's one of the things that always got me for Space Harrier. I loved Space Harrier as a kid.
Did you? The first time I died running into a tree, I'm like, well, that's my quarter. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The death sound is pretty iconic.
We call running into a tree pulling a chard.
There's no horse involved in this one.
Yeah, he's not running Sick Jake into it. Okay, when Sick Jake runs into a tree, it's called pulling a chard.
People aren't going to get that joke because they don't watch a stream. That's okay. I don't know. There is a Space Harrier game that came out later on the I can't remember the Naomi board, I think, for arcades. So there's like a 3D version of Space Harrier. That was actually fun to play. But otherwise, Space Harrier 1 and 2, I just couldn't get into it. But this is a faithful arcade port. If you're a fan of the arcade game, this is I'm sure worth it for you. Yeah. Like between this and Afterburner, that's pretty cool. I kind of wish it was a dual cart, one cart with Afterburner and Space Harrier together. That would have been a nice buy. But they separate the carts.
Yeah, but I mean, this gives you we could have had Super Hang-On. We could have had, a bunch of those older super scaling arcade ports could have been really cool on the 32X.
Yeah. Because the Genesis was always good as the home, bringing the arcade games to the home console, but they didn't look quite the same, right? Like I remember the Genesis when it came out with Altered Beast. It was not nearly as good as the arcade, but it was close enough for the time. That was nice. That was neat. But yeah, the 32X actually had the power to replicate those arcade games, but they only had the 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I mean, that's just a taste of the games in the system, right? There's 40 games on that console, but I think we showed the best few, right? I think for sure Virtual Racing, Virtua Fighter are the standouts, I think.
Yeah.
But there's so many disappointing games on this thing.
Yep. Star Wars Arcade, you know,
was decent. Yeah.
Yeah. So was it I mean, I think it was a failure of adding a stopgap when a stopgap wasn't necessary, and a failure of internal strife, right? Of two competing, divisions of a company.
And this is something I will never stop going on about. Like, if you've not read the Console Wars book about Tom Kalinski's time at Sega, do it. It's really interesting. And if you listen to the audiobook, dude does voices for everybody, so it's that much more entertaining.
Nice.
It's an interesting history because like the Sega made so many weird decisions hardware wise. When you compare them to what Nintendo was doing, right? The power base converter, then it's Sega CD, then this thing, and then the Saturn, and then the Dreamcast. Like, we look at it hindsight now, and just it's amazing they even made it to the Dreamcast era. Like, I'm surprised it didn't tank after the Saturn.
Yeah,
it's
I mean, they did the Nomad,
right?
Which was just a handheld Genesis.
Right.
Wonder if anybody ever tried to stick a 32X in a Nomad.
You want a fire hazard. That's gonna melt your hands. Can you imagine? There's got to be somebody who shoved that thing in there. Has to be. I had to look for it. That's funny. The Nomad.
Wedge in those heat shields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely, I mean, Sega was always willing to experiment with hardware, and that's admirable. I wish they did better as a company, because I do like a lot of the Sega stuff.
Sure.
I'm really disappointed about the Sonic game on this. Like, we didn't get Sonic until the Dreamcast, right? We had Sonic CD.
Yeah.
And we had this Knuckles Chaotix, and then nothing.
Yeah, we were supposed to get Sonic Extreme, and then that never happened. And then we sort of got a proof of concept of what a 3D Sonic could have been within Sonic Jam, which was just a collection of Sonic games.
Right.
But we never saw a proper Sonic game. And actually, we also saw another proof of concept of what a 3D Sonic game could have been, because in Christmas nights, you can unlock playing as Sonic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, it was entirely too long between a brand new Sonic game from there was 4 or 5 years of just no really new Sonic game. That's a long time.
Yeah, like I know the Game Gear had 3 Sonic games, but I think the last one came out. I still think it came out before the 32X. So yeah, it's bizarre. Well, that's the 32X, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to have more bits.
Yeah, it's all about them bits. 32 whole bits. I love, if anybody who's watching this episode of the podcast, if you actually had the 32X, first off, I'm sorry. but I would love to hear why you got it. Was it a gift from grandma who didn't know any better? Was it your parents who didn't want to pay for a Saturn because that thing was expensive? I'm curious to who actually bought this.
Did you want it because you thought it was the new hotness?
Yeah.
Did you?
I want to know about that too. I like hearing about.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Did you spend your hard-earned paper route money on this and have, buyer's remorse?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Although, I bet you with 600,000 sold, this is probably an expensive thing to collect for these days. It has to be, right? Limited number of games, limited number of systems. I bet you this is an expensive console to collect.
A lot of the 32X stuff, complete in box, is kind of pricey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to remember it had that patch cable that Sinistar was talking about. And then there were like alternate versions of patch cables depending on which model of Genesis you had. Some people would either just toss one or lose it or whatever. So finding a complete 32X is oof. I'm sure a lot of those heat shields have been tossed. People didn't even know what they were for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was fun researching, and it was entertaining playing the games for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
with
couldn't
the
actually
business?
play any, but I watched.
and if anybody's wondering, I played on real hardware
Sure.
In turbo mode.
It's,
in turbo mode.
sitting fused to your shelf behind you as we speak.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Sinistar sacrificed his Genesis for this episode. We thank you for your service, sir.
I'm on it. Awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we can go ahead and jump in. We probably want to rattle these off a little quicker than usual because this is
Yeah.
a long episode at this point. But our
Surprisingly
top
long.
100 nominations. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, either of you want to start or should I start?
I can go.
Cool.
I'm going to use
right.
your suggestion from before we went live, Wolf. My pick is Earthworm Jim, and I'm picking the Genesis version because that's the version I played, and I always felt it sounded better than the SNES version, but I know people will disagree with me there. From the era
Well, I
of
mean-
16-bit mascot platformers, I think Earthworm Jim is one of the best ones. Graphics, humor, music, the variety of stages. I really do like Earthworm Jim quite a bit.
Were any of them really bad though? Like there were so many ports of this game and they were all pretty decent.
I think there's a Game Gear one that's probably not great, but I mean that's
Oh, well,
the
I
Game
mean,
Gear, right?
that's like that's like saying, "Oh, it was on Game Boy," but yeah.
Actually, we did an early episode of I think on Earthworm Jim. I think if I'm not wrong, and
Yeah.
I remember we talked about how there's a Sega CD version, Genesis, SNES, and Windows, and they're all pretty great.
Mhm.
But the interesting fact between all of them was that the Peter Puppy stage where it's an escort mission. The background graphic was different in every single version of the games for some reason.
Yeah.
I never understood why. It's so bizarre. But yeah, I love the humor in this game. I love the character Earthworm Jim, and I've always said I really wish they did something with him that wasn't 3D because Earthworm Jim 3D was so bad. And there was like a recent game that came out or it was supposed to come out for the Amico. It also looks terrible, and it's such a shame because the character design is really cool and fun.
Mm.
But anyway, the
Yeah,
Genesis
nothing
version
like
is the bomb.
ripping yourself out of your body to swing by.
It's great.
Yeah.
And like the bad guy was it Queen Bloated Infestorous Slug for a Butt. Like it's 20 letters, 20 characters long. It's hilarious. Like it's just, I mean, I love everything about this game. I love the humor. I love the cartoon. And yeah, the Genesis version plays so well. So that's my pick.
Nice. Good pick. Well, I can go next if you'd like.
Yeah,
So,
go for it.
I'm really surprised because I don't think we have really any good representation of 4X games on the list. Probably the
Yeah.
closest would be Heroes of Might and Magic. So my pick is kind of the grandfather, the daddy, the whatever of them all, Civilization.
Oh yeah, that's definitely one to play on the 100 for sure.
Yeah.
Like that defined a genre, right? I mean, I know there might have been other 4X games before it, but I mean, Civilization is like the one, right?
Yeah.
And like the memes, the tropes, Gandhi, nukes, and a whole bit. Like, yeah.
Yeah, at
Yeah.
this point, I don't know that we'd have EU if we didn't have Civilization, you know?
Right.
Granted, I've never played, and by EU, I'm talking about Europa Universalis, if anybody is unfamiliar. But I've actually never really played a 4X game. I would say, what is it? What is it? Three Kingdoms. Shit, what are those called?
Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Those are 4X
Yeah.
games, but I never understood them as a kid. So
Yeah.
sort of stayed away.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing
But
about,
I was also playing a Genesis port, so
that's the thing about most 4X games and definitely Civilization is the complexity is high, right? I mean,
Yeah.
picking your progression tree so that you can get to certain aspects, different win, characteristics, different. I mean, My brother Finn and my cousins and I regularly play Civ 6 on our Wednesday nights. I have probably a couple hundred hours now in Civ 6, and I honestly feel like that many hours, I probably understand 80% of Civ 6. Like it's kind of
It's
kind of
deep.
that complex
Yeah.
and deep, right? Now Civilization 1, the original, was not nearly that deep, but if you're unfamiliar with a 4X game, it basically it drops you on a map, and it's like you have a character called a settler. What do you do? Where do you start? Where do you go? Right? And so definitely complex, but 4X is meant to be complex, right?
Yeah.
And for those that aren't aware, 4X means explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. So basically it encompasses a portion of all four of those in some way. So that's my pick.
This is a franchise I've always wanted to try and figure out again, and I just haven't made the time to go back and play any of them.
Yeah.
So that's my pick.
Alrighty. It's a good pick.
Thank
Good
you.
pick. I could talk, I swear. All right. I'm gonna go with one that I was hesitant to submit for this list, but now I think about it, it's probably worthy of the list. And I know I've talked about this game a million times on the podcast. Like me and this game are like Chard and Elden Ring, but Blaster Master for the NES.
Oh, is that that's not on there yet?
That's not on there yet.
The OG.
And
wow.
The OG.
Okay.
Okay.
And I mean, this is a game where the controls were tight, the action was fun, the game was challenging and kept you on your toes. Not every boss fight was different, but every boss fight at least tried to be different if it could. While it might have been a similar sprite and similar mechanics, they changed them up. And they only reused bosses like 3 times, I think, of the 8. Maybe not even 3, maybe just 2. But this was a really neat game. The music is stellar for an NES game. Like, this is one of the best NES soundtracks there are, I think.
It's Sunsoft, right? They always had bangers of OSTs. Say what you want with the gameplay, that the OSTs were always great in Sunsoft games.
Like, the story is stupid. Like, oh no, my frog jumped on a radioactive box and fell into the swamp hole. And then there was a tank so I could find him. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, of the games we talked about today in this episode, there's far worse storylines than Blaster Master. Blaster Master is basically Lord of the Rings compared to 32X games.
The premise is awful, but the game is spectacular. It's one of my favorites still.
Yeah.
So that is my submission.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We are getting very close to 100 games on our list, and we are calling this the top 100. Now we're trying to figure out if we maybe balloon a little bit past that and maybe drop some as we rank them. We're coming to all of that. Hopefully sometime either around the end of the year or the beginning of next year, we'll start either having an episode or two where we talk about our list and all of that stuff.
Yeah, we're hoping to have the GP back soon, before the end of the year, and because he's a big part of this list as well. And he's got a bunch of picks that we haven't disclosed yet, but I would like to do an episode with him just to break down his picks to add to the list, because he has some great picks for this list that we have to talk about.
Yep.
Yes, he does. I was looking at him. I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, I didn't think of that one. So he's got some good ones too. And then I was actually thinking, just so if we have any blind spots, perhaps, and this isn't a guarantee, but perhaps once we hit that 100 threshold, we'll ask the viewers to submit some games, and if we think they're worthy of the list, we can tack them on and then rate from there. So they may or may not make the top 100 list if we do that, but at least it'll get some outside perspective.
And that actually leads into a good segue. Come to Press B to Cancel. Join our Discord if you're not there.
Yes.
And hey, if you are in our Discord and you want to jump the gun and make a couple suggestions, feel free. Put them into either one of our, either the current episode or something. If you want to jump the gun and just be like, hey, this should be on the list.
Yeah, if I don't get any suggestions, I'm shoving Circus Charlie as my last pick because I'm running out of ideas. Because a lot of the ideas I have for games, you guys have already picked. Right, like that's the thing I'm running into now is we have a lot of overlap in the games we like, And I
I
mean, we have
rattled
some
off a
unique
few
picks, too.
before the episode start. You could use them if you
Yeah,
want.
I
I've only
might
got
have
one
to.
more slot.
Please, viewers, please make a recommendation so that Circus Charlie doesn't end up on our top 100.
Just doesn't get the respect it deserves, but that's okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been another tangential episode of Press B to Cancel. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next week. Sega!